Welcome back to another edition to the Root to Rising podcast, and I am your host, Christine Hummel. I have another special guest with me today, Boo, who is an author and also has quite a long history of different career paths that we're going to share with you today. I'm going to quickly toss it over to Boo. Welcome to the show, and please tell us a little bit about yourself, your personal and your professional brand.
Thanks, Christine. You must have got the memo about fighter pilots and their desire to talk about themselves. So the joke goes. Gosh, who are we? It's such a deep question. Look, I think to try and really go back to what I wanted to be as a child and how I've manifested that into life, I just wanted an adventurous life. You know, I never wanted to be in an office. I always used to say that to my parents. I connected with aviation and wanting to be a fighter pilot when I was very young. And then somewhere along the way, the universe kind of stepped in and redefined my path. So I spent 11 years as a fighter pilot in the Royal Australian Air Force, which I thought was a job for life. It was a wonderful career, wonderful people, learned a lot, very purposeful existence. And then when I was 30, I joined the Air Force when I was 19. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition that was arthritic in nature. And the cockpit of a fighter jet and pulling G forces and all that sort of stuff. It's very, very physical, and it was just too painful, sadly. So I had to try and reinvent myself, I guess. Wanting that life of adventure, I didn't really want to work for anybody. And being a fighter pilot, it's the only kind of salary job I've ever had. And in a lot of ways, it's not really a job. It really is a fulfilling way to exist. It's living a belief system. So I had to do something else. And I thought, well, you know, the closest thing to a fighter pilot outside of being a fighter pilot is being an entrepreneur. And when I started that journey, I knew that trying to start a business in Australia would have been hyper competitive. I had no skill sets apart from flying a jet. So I thought I'd go somewhere where the barriers to entry were low, and I moved to Afghanistan and set up a humanitarian project business. And did that for a few years, grew that to be a very significant business. Sold it, moved and segued into property development. I kind of like building stuff, and I had this kind of weird thing that I'd love to just build something so my kids could look at it and say, "Dad built that." That process was interesting. It brought the third world, which was, you know, trying to build stuff in the third world is really hard. It's expensive and it's hard to get materials. So we kind of came up with this idea to build things in factories and then just assemble them. And we took that to another level and built a 17-story luxury hotel in Australia. And from there, the universe put me in the audience for this event where a fighter pilot was on stage talking about how to use the way fighter pilots think and work in business. And it was just one of those moments where all your synapses fires and you're like, oh my gosh, that's my whole life story right there. And the gentleman who delivered the keynote presentation was a good friend of mine, another Australian fighter pilot. And it just so happened that he'd been doing it for 10 years and he didn't want to do it anymore. He wanted to go back and be a fighter pilot.
Oh, wow.
And in that moment, he's like, do you want to take it over? And I'm like, I don't know if I want to be a keynote speaker and do all this sort of stuff. But anyway, so I came to the US and I met the founder, Jim Murphy, and I acquired the license for this company called Afterburner. And at the time, it was like a process improvement strategy to execution, had a product called Flawless Execution. And then I started a bit of a journey with, you know, being a coach and getting on stage and helping inspire people to fulfill their potential. I bought a publishing business along the way and turned that into a digital publishing business and sold that as well. And then 3 years ago, the founder of Afterburner he'd kind of had enough, and which is understandable after doing it for 27 years. And I jokingly offered to buy the company off him and he accepted. And here I am in the US. and now, you know, I am very blessed to be running a company that takes our fighter pilot mindset, the methods we use and the moments that we show up. I call it the 3 M's, the 3 dimensions of leadership. And we've started a whole new journey with the company into a practice we call flawless leadership. And it all hinges on this, you know, humanity in the world is full of nuance, and humans come at the world in a very binary fashion. So my mission now in life, and you know, the good Lord put me on the path, is to really take what I learned as a fighter pilot, applied in business, and help other people do that to create this movement of flawless leaders. And if you look at the essence of the word flawless, it means you're never going to be perfect.
Yep.
But the fact you can't isn't an excuse to not try and get as close as you can. And to paraphrase Vince Lombardi, embrace excellence. So I believe a life of excellence is very fulfilling. When you embrace excellence, you set a standard that I believe the world has lost to some degree, a
Mhm.
standard of behavior, a standard of communication, a standard of service. And I think a lot of people are just a little bit lost at the moment. I think
Yeah.
leaders are very overwhelmed, very burned out, just very highly reactive. And for me, I want to help transition those leaders from this world of overwhelm into a world where they can genuinely make impact.
I love all that. And I think we'll go a little bit on how we can make an impact to leadership. That's so important and couldn't agree more. I like to go back to one of your first comments that you looked at life as an adventure. And that's a very important statement. I know a lot of my listeners are younger generation that are just graduating college, for example, or just starting out in their professional career. And they have a very linear path that they're creating for themselves. There's a line of events that they have to achieve to get to X, their dream job or their dream goal. And a lot of conversations we've had is similar to what you're saying is you treat life as an adventure. It's not a linear path, it's a branch and it can extend in so many different ways. And your examples and your experience, you had a lot of adversity that may have challenged you that caused you to pivot, but it sounds like to me you treated your life as a branch and you had the fighter pilot dream, but you had to kind of adapt and to allow yourself to move on to different things because of different challenges that came your way. So maybe let's go back and talk about one. How did you have such a passion to become a fighter pilot? Like, how did you know when you were younger that this is what you wanted to do? And then maybe walk the audience through when you had to adapt, when you were diagnosed with your autoimmune disease. How did you adapt? What did that feel like? You make it sound very simple. You're like, well, then I just pivoted and I moved on and had a different career path. But I can imagine it was challenging and you had to internally dig deep to rebound and to be adaptable in that surrounding. So maybe walk us through why of the fighter pilot and how did you adapt?
Yeah, I mean, it is simple. It's just hard. So
Yeah.
you don't need to make the journey unnecessarily difficult. The world
Mhm.
will make it difficult. You just need to be focused. And you mentioned a word there that I latch onto very strongly in the book around humanity is linear. Like that's how we think of
Mhm.
everything. We
Yep.
think of this is where I am and this is where I need to get to. My life was iterative. And
Mhm.
for me, that's the core mindset shift we need in humanity is to look at the world as an iteration of today. So every
Mhm.
tomorrow is just a small iteration. Now, through multiple iterations, sure, you'll create new branches, you'll create new things, but really, I do believe that you manifest success and the universe does kind of look after you. It sounds a bit woo woo, but I can. There's countless chapters in my life where it's like, wow, if we don't get paid or win a job or a program in the next 48 hours, we're going to go out of business, and then just manna from heaven, something just drops in your lap. I don't know how it
Mhm.
works, but it kind of does. So I'm kind of, I've learned in life that there's sort of this peak pain max reward ratio. So often
Yep.
the things that mean everything in life come after the peak pain, and that it's okay. It's okay to feel afraid. It's okay to feel down in the dumps. It's
Yep.
okay. The thing you got to do is just not quit. It's just dig deep. And the minute you just make that decision just to dig deep, you start to wash over that. So that whole, I'm lucky in two parts. One is I'm inherently kind of positive, I guess.
Yep.
And I didn't think I was going to be a fighter pilot. I believed I was going to be one. And that's two
Mm.
very different things. And the belief was instilled in me, when I was really little, like 4 or 5 years old, when I went to an air show and I saw the airplanes flying and, the pilots in the cockpit and the flight suits and the helmets and the oxygen masks. And, so I guess at the age of 5, a little bit like I want to be a fireman, like there's people flying those airplanes. They're not flying them
Yep.
themselves. So that was just going to be me one day. And that's just, I never had any doubt. There was no point where I didn't think ever I was not going to be a fighter pilot. Was I equipped with the natural skills to be one? Absolutely not. I
Mm.
I didn't know at the time because it wasn't a thing 40 years ago, that I have chronic ADHD. I only found that out about 3 years ago. So academically, I always struggled. But
Hmm.
because I believed I was going to be a fighter pilot, whenever I struggled too much, I just worked a bit harder. And
Hmm.
I did my 12th grade a second time to
Hmm.
get the marks. And what happens in life, and I think what happens in life if you want to do really important things, people around you judge the effort as much as they judge the results. And throughout my interview process and working my way through all the hurdles you jump over to become a fighter pilot, I was constantly reminded of how poor my academics were. But
Hmm.
about a decade ago in Australia, you can ask for a release of all of your records. And I got this, 2.5 gigabyte file of thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of records. And what I didn't appreciate or realize at the time was the first time I went into a recruiting office, I was only 12 years old. And the recruiting office was on the way home from school to the train station where I used to get the train home. And every single visit I made from the age of 12 to 18 was recorded. So
Uh,
so here you are at 18 and you're going through, there's very logical elements to becoming a fighter pilot. You sit in a room for 2 days, you do basic math and spatial orientation and a whole bunch of stuff. But when it comes to the subjective piece, which is the officer selection board, the psychologist was honing in on this thing that I was cocky. I was cocky. You're a
hmm.
cocky kid. But the pilot on the board saw it as being self-assured. And when I saw my record of that final meeting, I remember on the day I walked out and the pilot on the selection board walked out with me and he said, you're gonna need to learn how to do your tie properly. And for me, I was like, oh, I think I just got in. And in all of my notes of all the negativity, he just had in big writing on the page, this kid wants it more than the rest. And, that's what gets you through being a fighter pilot because it is
Yeah.
very hard. Like, it is a very hard slog. It's 400 training missions around about. Every one of those, you're assessed like someone looks over your shoulder. You're living life under a microscope every single day and everything you do. Because when you train, you live on a base and you're with all the other students and the instructors are there. So you're assessed over dinner. You're assessed in how you
Hmm.
emotionally deal with feedback. And what they create fundamentally in the Air Force for a fighter pilot it's a complete reprogramming of a human being.
Yep.
Because everything that we're equipped with to survive is counterculture to what it is to be a fighter pilot. And what you learn is the best way to grow is to embrace iteration. It's to
Hmm.
embrace the version that hey, the pilot I am today can be better tomorrow. Pretty simple rule: insert life, insert business, insert anything, and away you'll go. I think what we rely on in life is that some people naturally have that kind of way of thinking. Entrepreneurs, gold medal winning athletes,
Mhm.
they understand that I need a coach and that I need to be absolutely passionate about where I need to get to. But most of humanity isn't like that. And my purpose is to help the 98% understand that, hey, just tweak your thinking a little bit and break things down into daily achievement. And then, by the time you fly that very last mission and you are badged as a fighter pilot, it's just a tiny little mission.
Yeah.
It's the end of 2.5 years of training, but the day itself is just another hour and a half, just another hour and a half mission. And then that just sets you up to apply the same concept to become a good fighter pilot. Because when you finish training and you become a basic fighter pilot, you barely know what you're doing. You don't hit the ground, you don't hit your leader, and you don't run out of gas. So you've got to constantly, and because the knowledge you need as a fighter pilot is pretty much infinite, because you're dealing with technology and the technology is always
Hmm.
changing. And every time you fly a mission, it's kind of a different mission. It's never
Hmm.
fixed. There's never a fixed state. In our world, if you turn 2 degrees left and go, you know, 10 miles per hour slower, it can change the world for the other 60 airplanes in the sky. And if everyone's doing that, we would know that as chaos. So what happens is, as a fighter pilot, you're developed to understand how to deal with chaos at speed and that it's okay. Like, you don't need to know everything. You're not going to know everything. But what you focus your attention on is absolutely critical. So we embrace this idea of awareness over existence. And when you're a linear thinker, you are an existence based human being. You exist
Hmm.
and you operate in a framework that you think is fixed. Whereas iteration is every day can be different. every day can be a different version. And that means that all of the fear of change and uncertainty, it goes away, because that's just life. And for me, as much as people say, oh, you lost your dream, it was like, yep, that was a bad day, but iterate, just keep going. Just move it
I
to the
found a
next.
new one, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the overriding is, I was very lucky at the age of 5 to have this belief system instilled into me as an ADHD person, having something where you absolutely have to focus on running through the stepping stones of mission 1, mission 2, all the way up till qualification means you're hyper focused, and focus is, we don't really do that anymore in the digital
Yep.
world.
Yep.
And then we wonder why, I don't feel good and I'm not getting anywhere. And really it's a case of, create your long-term focus, create your achievement list for the day, stay absolutely focused, get the things done that you need to get done, then go and be distracted rather than have your phone sitting in front of you on your computer. So yeah, I like I said, it is simple, but it's hard.
Yeah.
It is hard work, and it is mastery of yourself
Yep.
is what it's about. It's not mastery of the environment. It's not mastery of business. It's not mastery of a subject that you're studying at college. It's mastery of you is really what it boils down to.
So before we go deeper there into the focus, because I agree with you 100%, there's so many distractions and instant gratification that humans have around us today. We've lost some of our focus, and it scares me for the younger generation even more that they've grown up with this and are dependent on it. I think our generation is probably a little bit more fair balanced with it, hopefully. But let's go back to, you were younger and you knew that you wanted to be a fighter pilot, and you said what differentiated you among all the other applicants or candidates was that you worked harder. Do you think that people are all at the same foundational starting point? And what differentiates someone like in you? Why did you work harder than the rest? Why did you want to give that extra effort? What was it in you that you decided to stop at the recruitment office, every day since age 12? And, I'm trying to understand, do we think that's, something that's innate within us? Or do you think that's something with an environment that teaches us to work harder? Why do, even today, if you translate it today, why do people show up differently today? Why do some people choose to show up and work harder than others?
I think there's some nature element to it. I think there's certain, you know, there's ample research that shows that high performing people are often managing a dysfunction, some dysfunction in their childhood, or a self-worth hole that they're trying to fill through a sense of achievement. So I think there's a bit of both. I mean, there's certainly a lot of successful surgeons and lawyers and
Mhm.
who live in well, until to probably recently, a fairly stable environment that is relatively linear. But I think also that if you want to get philosophical about it, I do think there is the way the human race is engineered. There are leaders and followers. I think some people
Yep.
are just comfortable following, and they find peace with that, and that's
Yep.
fantastic. I mean,
Great.
there's nothing wrong with that. But if you have an itch that you need to scratch, if you want to be something, it's I love watching all these biopics on bands, like Queen or Taylor Swift or Michael
Hmm.
Jackson. And, if you look at the Jackson 5, why Michael? Well, he wanted it more. He wanted it more
Mm.
than the rest. And why did In Excess, one of the most popular
Yep.
bands globally, become so big? Well, because they lived in a car and they jammed every single dive bar for years before they put in the reps. It's the same 3 chords everyone else plays, but they did the work, right? Taylor
But the,
Swift.
but there's other bands though that do the same thing. They go in a car and they work hard. Do you think luck has anything to do with it, or breaks, or do you think it's just hard work?
There's hard work and there's exceptionally hard work. They're 2 different things. Like, grinding it out is work, and it feels like effort, but often there's a lack of direction to that,
Mm.
right? I think that, or particularly with the band, there's 3 out of 4 that it means everything to,
Mm.
and then there's someone that it doesn't. I mean, I personally think rock bands, there's a reason why they all, take drugs and drink, because it's so hard and it's so much effort that that's the only way you can cope, right? That's the only way a human can survive at that level of effort, like the extreme 20-hour-a-day effort, not 18 hours, 20 hours. Yeah, Michael Phelps I did not miss a single day of training.
Right.
Not one. Not one. And it's that whole difference between, 99.9% commitment and 100% commitment. Because 0.01 is a get out. 0.01 is 3 days of the year that you didn't do the reps. And, there's again, I just think that the universe rewards effort, but it rewards effort when it's pointed in the right direction. And so it's, and I remember once one of my instructors said to me, Boo, don't be lazy. And I'm like, I'm not being lazy. I'm being efficient where I apply effort, because a lot of other pilots and the ones that didn't become fighter pilots would do a lot of work. But sometimes, if you need to know something and you need to know 10 units of knowledge and you study 15, you've just wasted 5 units and you can't remember the 10. So there's this very, the quality of every second of effort is important. And I certainly learned that as a fighter pilot. Like, we value time on a second by second basis. Like, if you can string together 90 minutes of second by second focus, you'll achieve the same as someone does with 8, 9, 10 hours of divided attention. And I think that's the key. It's the Michael Hutchins of In Excess, that even after gigging, he's writing songs. He wakes up in the morning, he's writing songs. He's up at 1 o'clock in the morning, he's writing, he's thinking. At no waking moment of my life am I not thinking of my business? Am I not thinking of being a fighter pilot? The second I wake up, it is literally dialed in to what I need to achieve today for the business. And it's not by design, it's just how I'm programmed. And I do think I wasn't like that before I was a fighter pilot. I could certainly have applied myself better. I could have got straight A's if I applied myself, but I did literally the minimum amount of effort to get a B+ average to get selected. So it's, so I think it's that, I call it destination thinking, destination driven thinking. If you're about to apply effort and you can't have a line of sight to where you arrive at the end of the effort, don't do it. And I think in the corporate space, why we see engagement, down in the low 20%, is that no one really knows what the work's delivering. They're just getting pushed around because leaders are reacting to the world. They're not getting ahead of it and responding. They're not taking a breath in between input and output. So I think there's and the other thing that I think is particularly hurting us today is the amount of time things take. We're in the world of instant delivery of expectation, right? We have Uber Eats, Netflix. Like, if you want something, you get it straight away. And subconsciously that now feeds into life. So, you're in a relationship. I want sex now. Well, hang on. There's a pathway to that. I want my partner to behave like this now. And it's like, whoa, that's not how it works. You to do really big things takes a long time. I mean, it took me 17 years from wanting to be a fighter pilot and believing I was going to be a fighter pilot to actually being one. 17 years. And the first business I started grew rapidly in 3 years. It was hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm in my 3rd year of this business here, and we're in our 3rd year, and we're a little bit bigger than we were a year ago because it's just different problems. Now, I want to be $100 million business, but at the same time, I realize that what we're doing is more difficult than the other business. It's more competitive, the environment. There's a lot more noise in there than ever was before. So you've got to kind of realize that the one thing you cannot control is time. The only thing you can control is the application of effort. And one of the core principles of being a flawless leader is to be 100% invested in what you can control and adapting intelligently to what you can't, and to not even try and control. Don't even try and control one of your team members. Don't even try and control your partner. Don't even have the thought, because the minute you think you can control someone or something that's not you, you set yourself up for disappointment. And there's this study that was done a few years ago around undiagnosed perfectionism. And it wasn't the core theme of my book. And then when I found this study, it became the core theme, because humans, we go back to the world is a very nuanced place, but the way in which a human engages with the world is very binary. And how that manifests as undiagnosed perfectionism is the narrative we tell ourselves unconsciously, which is, if you're not perfect and you're not successful and you're not delivering exactly on your targets, you're a loser. And the problem with perfectionism is it drives the urge to control the external world. And then when you try and control the external world, you become overwhelmed, and you use all of your cognitive bandwidth on things that will never change.
Why
And then,
why is perfectionism the goal though? Why is that always have been the goal? Like everything we're taught, right, growing up is you need to be perfect, you need to, dot all the I's, cross all the T's. And still to this day, there's little room for mistakes to be had. So as a leader, what advice, because it is a change of mindset for people to think you're not striving for the perfect, you're striving for the process and improving the process and making your team work together, holistically to have a synergistic effect. So why do you think we have strived for the perfect, and what can we do, or what in your philosophy can we do to change that mindset?
well, the reason we get seduced into perfection is because it's binary. It's done, not done. And
Mm,
everything in our biases is engineered towards generic decision making, because the brain is so complex that we have to have a kind of a simple autopilot to live. Perfection is no different to, that's a bad person, that's a good person. It's like, well, no one
mm,
is all good or all bad, but we make those assumptions, right? So perfection is binary. So it's conceptually simple. The problem
mm.
is, from an
It's
internal narrative.
unattainable.
Yeah, yeah, from an internal narrative. And I think it's why a lot of people quit. It's
Yep.
why we kind of live these beige lives where we sort of give up,
Yep. Yep.
because we feel it's hopeless.
Yep.
So flawless is let's see how close we can get, and create perfect moments. So if
Mm,
you want to deliver, let's say you're a sales team, you're a regional sales manager, and you've got to land 3 million in sales by the end of the quarter, right? So all you've done really is give yourself one win in 90 days. But if you start to think like a fighter pilot, which is missionization, how many missions do I need to fly to get to 3 million? How many pilots do I have on the team? Is every one of those pilots fully skilled up? Have they practiced? Are they rehearsed? Do they understand the airplane? Do they understand the product? Do they know how to have a conversation where we put the client's needs before our own? All of that you can be in control of. But what actually happens is they just sit there, yelling at their people. You know, they don't yell anymore. They do it in a subconscious yelling and telling, and meetings and meetings and meetings.
mhm,
Uh, so what happens is everyone starts to hide, right? And
mm,
everyone starts to make excuses, and we end up with people becoming disengaged. And the people that carry the load are the high performers who are dysfunctional. So you end up with this kind of, it's why, companies hold on to so many toxic, successful people. And
yes,
the toxicity it effectively disengages 80% of the workforce, and the 20% carry the can, but they're incredibly difficult to deal with. I am one of those people, so I'm not judging them. I am
mhm,
aware of my own, from being bullied as a kid, being told I'm a skinny runt,
mm,
I was a wog, I was a wop, I was Greek, in a white Anglo-Saxon school, you know, so my father didn't think I was going to be a fighter pilot, couldn't really amount to
mm,
anything. So,
wow,
I had, great rage motivation, but that's great. There's lots of angry people who are successful, but it's not a great way to live.
right,
So you learn later in life that that's not good. So the fighter pilot. So where I had the disconnect was, as a fighter pilot, I was taught how to be a high growth leader and fighter pilot, but the penny didn't drop that I can use the same way of thinking in my personal life. So I
mm,
would approach my personal life controlled, energetic, aggressive, and wonder why doesn't life work out as well as a fighter pilot? And the key mindset piece for a fighter pilot is that every day you reflect on your performance versus the expectation. Like we call it debriefing. And debriefing as a practice becomes a culture, and then it becomes a cognitive model. So I have 24 fighter pilots that are on my team, and they apply the same way of thinking to businesses because it's just a different thing. But whatever the thing is, it can be better tomorrow. And so, I had a little bit of PTSD after living in Afghanistan and Middle East for too long, and I invested in a process, and I full-time engaged a psychologist for a year. I was very lucky to be introduced to a very successful property developer who was also a spiritual healer, not as hey, I'm a spiritual healer, but just was a very interesting guy. And that's when I started to understand, ego isn't a big ego. Ego is how you see yourself. And once you start to create this idea of the best way to see yourself is from the outside in, not the inside out. And that's exactly what we do as a fighter pilot. It's always from the outside in. And then clicked. And everything from there in life has been, far more aspiration driven rather than rage driven. So I think, and as I said, the universe just puts these things in front of you if you're open to it. But none of that would have happened unless I made the decision to do some work on myself. And my marriage broke down. There's just a gazillion things that went on. The business was stolen away from us through an investor. It was just a bad time. But again, it all had a purpose in life, which is now to have had those experiences and to, one, help people who have also had them. I don't think you can ever avoid them. I don't think anyone lives a life where something real bad doesn't happen at some stage. But I think some people turn that into, blame rather than accountability. And the great thing about accountability is we perceive we're accountable to other people, but really you're accountable to yourself. And when you're accountable to yourself, to use a metaphor here, you're in the cockpit. So you can control up, down, left, right, fast, slow. You're in full control when you're accountable. Does that mean that you're always going to show up as the best version in an argument? Does that mean you're not going to have a clash of beliefs with other people? Does that mean that, I've lived all over the world. I've lived in Afghanistan. I've lived in Dubai. I've lived in the United Kingdom. I've lived in Papua New Guinea. Am I a bad person because I just prefer to be around my culture and my people because it makes life a bit easier? No. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that I think, we're a bit hard on ourselves trying to be the perfect version of ourselves. There's this kind of ebb and flow in life where, like I had about 4 hours of sleep last night. And, so I know today I'm not going to be the best version of myself. But just knowing that means that I can bring awareness to getting frustrated, with my son, being short with the team, just wanting things to be done. So I know that I'm going to show up to those conversations in the incorrect frame of mind, and therefore I can do something about it. And for me, that normally means just be quieter, just listen more.
Yeah, right. Know your expectations of yourself for that day.
Yeah, exactly. And today's one of those days where I'm going to have to force myself to go to the gym. So I have this. So I create different expectations. So when I'm feeling good, I want to go to the gym. I want to work out. When I'm feeling bad, my aspiration is to get to the car park of the gym. I've got nothing else other than that. 9 times out of 10, I walk in. 1 times out of 10, I'll get to the car park. I'll come home. But that 9 times out of 10, if I wanted to do a workout, I'd talk myself out of it because I'm too tired.
Right.
So the funny thing about delivering on expectation is there's 2 sides to it. One is the expectation itself, and the other is the performance. And so often in life, we just focus on the performance, not the expectation. It's actually the expectation that needs to be moderated along with the performance.
So with all that you've said in terms of specific tactics or strategies that you communicate to, your teams that you're working with as leaders, but something that would be translatable to also the younger generation so we can impact the mindset earlier on versus, when you're an experienced professional and now you have to pivot and learn things a little differently. What would be some of those tactics or strategies that you communicate to your teams or to companies or leaders that would help the audience understand, different ways to shift that mindset?
Yeah, it's not a big shift, and I guess what I would call it is a tweak. It's a
Mm,
mental tweak. I think for most of us, we're well intentioned and we have intentions for ourselves. The problem with an intention is it's a story, it's not reality. So the key tweak is to connect reality and intention every day. So when we talk about an intention, you want to define it as a destination. So you want to start to think, right, what does good look like at the end of today? Okay. Yeah, I have 2017 and 5 years old. That's my kids. So they're a full
mhm,
school, right? And I wasn't great at school, so I don't have an expectation on my kids to be great at school. They're better than me. But what I say to them is don't particularly my son who has ADHD as well. It's like don't judge yourself based on the grades that you have. I judged myself as not being very smart for 4 decades until I got diagnosed with ADHD, and then I flipped the narrative. I'm like, I've got a superpower, and
mhm,
I say that to my son as well. I'm like, dude, you're a you have a superpower. You're just waiting for the moment to use it. So the method that I've kind of documented in the book, both in Afterburner Advantage and Flawless Leadership, it's called the method, and it's ORCA, ORCA, and it's an iterative loop in itself. So what the O stands for is what is the objective, and the objective is what's the objective of the effort. So for my daughter, who hates geography. And when I talk to her, I'm like, look, you don't hate geography. Do you hate mountains? Do you hate swimming at the
right.
beach? And she's like, no. And it's like, well, that's just geography. Like it's the world that we live in. So why don't we just, spend the next month not worrying about the mark, but reframing our perception of geography, of what it actually is. Because again, brain binary geography sucks. So so the objective is let's reframe geography. What's the result? Well, week 1, I hate geography. Week 2, I learned something interesting about rivers today. Week 3, did you know this, Dad? Week 4, boom, marks start to go up. So the objective needs to be objective in nature, done, not done, but it doesn't always need to be a mark or a number. It just needs to be something that you can see yourself as at a very fixed point in time. So the O is the objective, the R is the reality, like where you're currently at, and the C is curiosity, like why is there a gap between where I am and where I want to be? The linear thinking is the opposite. It's like this is the result, and this is where I want to get
Mm,
to. It's the wrong way around. And then the A in Orca is the action. And when a human being takes actions and the actions become repetitive, they become habits and they become new behaviors. And the way a behavior manifests is it is the end point of a bias. So a bias is unconsciously how we see the world. It's the current program we run. The belief is how we think of that bias in the
mm,
cognitive sense, and we behave in accordance with what we believe. The way to reprogram biases is the opposite. You have to start behaving differently first. That changes what you believe you're capable of or believe in the world. And then that reprograms your bias. So Afghanistan, for example, I had no idea what I was doing. It was, all we read in the paper is it's Muslim country, everyone's trying to blow us up. So when you go there, you have that in the back of your mind. And when they say this in the back of my mind, that means a bias. So all of a sudden you get there and it's like, oh, these people are just like us. In fact, they're probably a bit happier because if you give them $5, it's like
mm,
Christmas because their expectations are so low. So what you start to realize is manifest in the real world. You start to realize a lot of unhappiness is linked to expectation. I call it normalization theory, where put a human in any environment and give them 6 weeks, they'll normalize to the environment. Why I ended up with PTSD is because I was so normalized to an environment of scarcity that in an environment of abundance, and where people couldn't see that it was abundant, where they viewed abundance as scarcity because I don't have the right BMW, I don't have the right color seats in the car. You start to realize we've normalized at the very rich or the wrong level here in the Western world. There's like real human needs out there, and having a real human need met makes you feel good. Having something that doesn't mean anything and getting it doesn't make you feel good because it's empty. So, you start to get these different perspectives, but underlying it all is that Orca way of thinking. It's this constantly looking at everything is how can we do this a bit better tomorrow? How can we make someone's life a bit better tomorrow? Not through intention, but through action.
That's awesome advice. And maybe to wrap up, one of our last questions is we talked a little bit about that instant gratification that we as people are used to, with your examples of Netflix and Amazon and Uber Eats, everything that we want, we think we get instantaneously. So what advice would you give to, either current leaders or specifically the younger generation that again, they're so dependent on that instant gratification because that's how that's how they've grown up. That's kind of all they know. They're very dependent on social media. And now you throw in, the AI world on top of everything else. So what advice would you give for someone that can be focused more on the long term, on the strategy, on the process versus that instant gratification?
Well, we're just filling a vacuum. That's what it is. Parents are wondering why their kids are on social media, yet when they're 3 years old, you're putting them on an iPad at dinner because you want them to be quiet and you want them to be well behaved, right? So, and then you wonder why they're conditioned to go and find peace and solace in digital distraction. If you fill a child's life with activity, so just a small example is when we first moved to the US, we're in Miami and very busy, lots of traffic, cars everywhere. So, our son kind of gravitated a little bit more to digital or watching cartoons, that sort of stuff, because he couldn't just wander around in the streets. Now we live in the mountains. He's barely on there. He doesn't touch any devices because he's always out. He's doing stuff. He is playing soccer, running around in the mountains, doing the bird seed. He's just always got something to do. And he doesn't like the digital stuff anymore. He gets on there, he's like, Dad, can we play soccer? He sits there and we flip through pages of the, what's a volcano? He's like curious and lies in bed with, he's only 5 and he just lies in bed with like 10 books on top of him, just doesn't know the words, but he knows the stories. So it's, again, be accountable for the environment that you create. I don't think there is advice for people that are technology addicted. It's like any other addiction. It's just
Yeah.
You smoke for the dopamine, you're a sex addict for the dopamine, you're a drug addict for the dopamine, and the escape. But fill that with purpose. And I don't mean purpose like I've got to be the president of the United States, but fill it with purposeful activities. So for Joshua, it's like, he likes to score as many goals as possible in a 30-minute, muck around with the soccer ball. So for him, he won't stop playing until he scores 20 goals. That's a purposeful activity because the effort has a purpose. And when you're sitting there and you're wondering, what am I doing this for? That's purposeless. So you've got to go back to running through this idea of setting 3 achievements a day, not intentions, but 3, I got to achieve this. In the morning, do the difficult thinking work, right? Give yourself from, I get up at 5 until about 9, and it's like 4 hours of just focus work, right? And then from 9, it's collaboration. So it's where you're discussing things. And in the afternoon, it's human connection. Because human connection requires it requires the least amount of attention and cognitive bandwidth, because in a human moment, you should be asking questions. You shouldn't be talking. Whereas in the morning, and that kind of maps the circadian rhythm. Like you get most of your energy in the morning, it tails off about 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and then it kind of comes back into the evening. Instead of just grinding it out all the time and then wondering why you're exhausted. So I have to wake up early because I have a puppy. So that's why I don't get any sleep, because she needs to get up and go out. And once I'm on, but I go to bed early. So, so this viewing intentions as destinations is really, really important. And you can use Orca as a parent with your kid, like with my daughter. You can help them understand that, oh, why am I learning chemistry? Why am I learning this? And then you can give them a can of soda and say, that's chemistry. That's a liquid turning into a gas right there. And it's like, I always wondered why we had bubbles. And I wonder, when I'm on an airplane with my son, I'll say, hey, look, you got to see how you get a lot more bubbles up here because there's less air pressure. So there's more bubbles. And, you can be fascinated with small things, but someone as a parent has to draw your attention to the small
Mhm.
things. And then when you start to enjoy discovery at a very micro scale, that releases dopamine. You get the same effect. It's just that it's serving you rather than hindering.
Yeah. And one thing I want to connect what you said earlier about hard work to this conversation about orca and intention and purpose. I want to differentiate and let me know if you agree. The hard work is not just putting in more hours. It's not just the quantity of the time. It is what you're gaining throughout the quality of the time that you're spending through the hard work. So you're going to automatically learn more. You're going to be more invested in people that you're meeting. You're going to have different experiences if you're working hard. So for me, the connection I just made as you're talking is the hard work is I can be somewhere physically for 12 hours, but if I'm not mentally there with intention and purpose and holding myself accountable to learn from that hard work, that's not going to make a difference in me. And the hard work, the difference of the analogy you made from the band that's successful and that's not, they work harder because they're all committed, they're working together, but they're invested in that hard work and they're intentional and they're finding their purpose. So I want to make sure the audience knows that there's a connection there between showing up, but when you show up with attention and purpose, which you just talked about, Boo. And that is, I think, a gap today that we have, that people think if they just show up that they'll get the job or they'll win the opportunity. And it's not. It's about showing up with attention and purpose. But I love to understand your perspective of that.
Yeah, I think what's happened is the self-help movement has done the world a disservice, particularly around this idea of purpose. Because for some reason, living a purposeful life means you need to be a fighter pilot. It means you need to be a successful rock band. It means you need to run $1 billion hedge fund. A teacher at a country school who shapes and creates that focus for a 6-year-old child is probably more purposeful than someone that is a high flying marketing executive, to be honest.
Hmm. Uh-huh.
And if you look at the way that the human body's neurochemistry is engineered, and if you just focus on dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins, all three of those chemicals are engineered to reward hard work. Yeah. So dopamine is released when you personally do something difficult and you win. Oxytocin is when we do it collectively. It creates the harmony of a village. That's why it's there. It obviously helps a mother through childbirth too, but it's that kind of love and connection feeling that you get. Serotonin is happiness, and you're generally happy when you're winning. So if you have little wins every day, you feel good.
Mm.
And then endorphins, that's the heavy lifting, that's the runner's high. So so there's an association with hundreds of thousands of evolution where purposeful effort delivers a reward. The problem is we think the reward only comes at the end. When I'm a partner at a law firm, when I've run under 2 hours at the Boston Marathon, it's the ability to craft the small win on a daily basis or even break it down into 3 little wins a day. And there is always going to be days where it's too hard. And that's okay, because just, don't do anything then. Like, don't,
Mm.
what
Yep.
your body's saying is if it's too hard, it's saying, hey, look, I've done a lot. I need to rest. I need to recharge. Your body tells you it. It's telling you. You're tired isn't an accident. Tired isn't I'm a failure because I'm tired. I'm so weak. When you train as a pilot, it's a 4-day week. Like you don't push on a Friday. Friday is
Yep.
slow work. Friday is easier work. If you tried to bring the intensity of being a fighter pilot to 5 days a week, you couldn't do it. When you're in combat, you fly once every 3 days because you need a rest. You can't bring intensity all the time. But yet, the perfectionist, I'm lazy, I'm weak, I
Mm.
just need to do more. And then, the world will look after you. You'll get cancer, you'll have a heart attack, you will be forced into the rest. So again, we didn't talk about it. We're always talking about intentional purpose, intentional this, but energy is a finite resource. You need to be intentional about recovery as well.
That's awesome. So, Boo, as we end up our conversation today, which again, thanks for being on Route to Rising, any words of advice or last words of wisdom that you would give younger generation, maybe just graduating college, or even maybe experienced professionals that are trying to find their new, their new path, or have a different transformation that they're going through? Any last words of advice for the audience?
Yeah, I have bad advice. I used to give this advice and I realized it probably wouldn't work. And it would be, hey, look, everything's going to be okay. Take a breath. You'll be okay. But at no point was that me when I was going through my teens and 20s. Everything was like, oh, I've got to be great.
Hmm.
Got to work hard. So I do think just be comfortable with what you are. Like just know you've got it in you. You've got it in you. It is going to be hard and it is going to be uncomfortable. But if you want to get there, try and be more reflective. Try and grow every day. Treat every opportunity as an opportunity for growth. If you're seeking a job interview and you don't get it, send an email. Why didn't I get it? Why didn't I get through the first gate? That's effort. That's what I'm talking about. That's the hard work that ultimately means by the 150th iteration of your first interview, you've got 150 learnings across the way. You probably have 30 because you probably ignored 120 times. But the universe rewards the effort. It really does. But it doesn't want wasted effort. It wants you to be in service to others in a way that enhances the world. It's the universe is abundant, but fear is scarce. It forces us to be afraid. So, Gary Vee says it great. He goes, I'm never disappointed because I have no expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at the Gary Vees, the Dan Martells, they're like, I've never looked at a person's CV when I hired them, not once.
Yep.
In the Air Force, it's they recruit mindset. They don't recruit skill set.
Yep.
And
Yep.
the mindset is, hey, I'm not there yet, but damn, I want it. And I'm going to learn. And I'm going to be the best version of this in 2 to 3 years than you can ever imagine. And no one goes into a conversation that way. Everyone goes into conversations. They're awesome. I am. This is what I've done. I've done this. I've done that. Done is only relevant in this second. The next day is a different day. It doesn't matter. So there are some rules in the universe. Yes, you want to be in a big corporate. You pay your dues. You do what you're told. That's just what's in that book. When you read that book, that's how it works. But you can still master that game. You can still grow and iterate and learn the politics and learn how it all operates and say to yourself, I want to be a partner. I'm not there yet. This is another day I can learn. This is another day I can understand the dynamic. This is the question. This is the time I can ask a question. This is the time not to. This is the time to work hard. This is the time to relax. Everything in life is like a game of football. There's a playbook. But too many of us expect that we can just get on the field with no skills and be the quarterback. It's the people that learn the fastest and understand the game dominate the game.
That's awesome and such great advice throughout our entire conversation. So again, Boo, who's the CEO and author of Afterburner and also author of Flawless Leadership, thank you so much on being to Route to Rising. We really appreciated everything that you've said. And thanks again. And hopefully we'll make sure that we put in all the show notes, all the different sites and LinkedIn posts and books that you can catch up with Boo. Again, this is Route to Rising. This is Christine Hummel, a platform created for those to hear different stories and experiences to gain knowledge, perspective, and purpose. Thanks, Boo. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Christine. Very grateful for the opportunity.